Chapter 35. Baptism. Emma opened her eyes. All around her a wall of fire cascaded out the sides of the tower, flowing upwards with the weight of the gas. The helicopter had disappeared. Johnny had disappeared. Orange filled her vision as she waited for the flames to engulf her. The roar of the explosion shattered her eardrums, and all she could hear was the ringing white noise of nothingness as the fire poured past her body, a harsh blast of wind threatening to push her off the edge. And still, she waited. Black smoke rose from behind her out of the air ducts and stairwells, following the orange flames into the sky. Particles of soot, broken glass, and the detritus of millions of ashen things scratched at her skin before whipping away toward the dropping sun. She held her breath, waiting to feel pain. Nothing happened. Am I dead? She wondered, looking down at her fingers, which were their normal tan shade. Her arms were the same too, a translucent film surrounding her skin like a ghastly shell. Only then did she realize the clothes Stravinsky had forced her to wear had burned away, among the blackened trash thrown into the sky with the blast. She stood there trembling, her skin aglow as the last winds of smoke petered out from below. I'm dead, she thought, turning around to see the building floor still standing, albeit charred and damaged. She expected the pillars to crumble at any moment, crushing anything left of her corpse in the rubble. But still they stood, and so did she. The weight of her frozen lungs snapped her out of expectation. Emma collapsed onto the burned floor, very much alive, gasping for breath with every bit of her being. Oxygen was starting to fill the vacuum left by the fire, but not fast enough. Desperately, she crawled in the direction of the building's edge, feeling every inch of the bare concrete scraping at her bare skin. The film protecting it had disappeared. She was in excruciating pain, but she had not burned. Reaching the edge, Emma threw her head into an updraft of air and breathed as deeply as she could, trying to keep her head from spinning. Now clear of the thickest part of the smoke, she could see beyond the tower's scalded frame. The helicopter was still in the air, having maneuvered away from the blast just in time. She could not see Johnny. Please, she prayed. Not me. Save him. Someone must have noticed her form emerging from the gray wisps. The helicopter dropped several floors, circling around the clouds to get as close as they could. Like before, the booming voice pierced through the noise, commanding her to jump. It was more like a possession releasing her body. Emma relaxed, stepping off the edge and falling into weightlessness. A sharp ammonia smell flashed her back to life. A thin Arab man dressed in looser-fitting mission suits pulled a broken packet of salts away from her nose. It's all right, a similarly dressed woman calmed. You're all right. You're safe. Where? She started, but Emma's memories flooded back immediately. Where's Johnny? She'd expected to find herself in the helicopter. Instead, they were on the ground, the open doors of an ambulance revealing their position roughly a half-mile from the foot of the tower. Broken glass and blackened pieces of concrete littered the frontage road. As she remembered the fire, she was shocked to see the burned shell of the building still upright. She repeated the question. Johnny, she said nervously. Where is he? The woman turned to her partner, with a look that made Emma's heart race in fear. He's en route to the hospital, the man said, nonchalant. The woman still looked nervous. Is he dead? Emma asked, frantic. He's not dead, she calmed, holding a hand to Emma's chest. At least he wasn't when he left here. She swallowed. But his body had gone into shock. The man was pouring a pitcher of water into a cup on the vehicle's side shelf. Crazy a lot it happened the way it did, he said. I've never seen anything like that. Seeing the look of confusion on Emma's face, he elaborated. You both came out of there with severe oxygen deprivation. It slowed his heart rate enough that it probably stopped his heart from giving out. His attitude gave her a slight peace. Allahu Akbar, the woman praised with a smile. Emma repeated the phrase as a courtesy. His arm, she added. Will he? Probably, the man agreed, confirming her worst fears with terse honesty. If they don't, I doubt he'll ever be able to move it again. Her solemn sigh was interrupted by him handing over the cup of water. Here, he offered. Drink. You need it. The woman helped her sit upright on the edge of the gurney, wrapping a trauma blanket over her shoulders, which she only then realized were adorned in a white hospital gown. Emma took the cup and drank, disappointed by the warm temperature of the liquid. I'm Fuad, he introduced. This is Mariah. The woman gave a polite wave. Emma looked at them both in turn and smiled politely back. The pair must have been in their early 20s, no doubt an adult squad specializing in local rescues. "You're from Hariat?" she asked. "Emergency rescue," Fuad confirmed. "Squad 2045. We thought we were going to have to go in there and break you out until we spotted you on the edge." "Glad we didn't." Mariah gestured to the ruined asphalt around them. "How did you..." Emma started. "Who sent you? How'd you find Johnny?" "What do you mean?" Fuad countered. "You threw him at us." "Everything's under the green," Mariah interjected. "We can't tell you more than that until your foreign minister gets here." Emma felt her breath catch again. Doug's coming? She thought. The idea of Doug Symbolic being the first American to greet her was actually somewhat calming, but it meant that her father could not be far behind. He would never let her out of his sight again. "How are you feeling?" Mariah raised, placing a clipboard next to Emma and unwrapping a stethoscope from her shoulders. "Fine," Emma said, just as Mariah touched her wrist to take her pulse. She recoiled with a grimace. "Sorry," Emma apologized, remembering what every doctor had told her about the condition of her hands. "Lack of iron. I know." "They're burning," Mariah corrected. "You mind calming that down for me?" Emma looked at her hands confused. "What?" "That's better," the nurse thanked, returning her hand around Emma's wrist and reaching the stethoscope below the collar of the gown. 200/80. Fuad picked up the clipboard and began writing. "That's a cool effect," Mariah continued. "Was your IPI something similar?" Emma started, her eyes darting between the pair, almost blurting out, "My what?" A black cloud descended from the ceiling of the ambulance. Whatever Fuad had written on the clipboard was now inaccurate. Emma's heartbeat was practically erupting through her ears. "No," she thought. Fuad started laughing. "That was her IPI," he mused, turning his attention from Mariah to Emma. "Wasn't it?" She would have avoided a response, but he answered his own question. "It says here she's a Hadafa," he explained to Mariah, whose inquisitive look turned to one of astonishment. "Really?" she gazed. "You didn't know you would survive the fire, did you?" he asked. Emma shook her head. The questions were beginning to make it throb. "Makes you a better person than me," he worded. "I would have given up hope. Divine reward for that kind of sacrifice." "It's not unheard of," Mariah intoned. "Rare, yes, but it's been documented before." "Either way," Fuad added. "Congratulations. Welcome to..." "Can you just leave me alone for a minute?" Emma exploded, her voice shrieking louder than she meant it to. The pair were stunned into silence. "I'm sorry," Emma said. We get it," Mariah apologized. "Take as much time as you need. We'll be around if you need something." She tipped her head in the direction of the open doors. "Come on, Fuad." The pair stood and turned the corner on the ambulance. The pounding in Emma's ears was beginning to quiet. She could hear other sirens off in the direction they headed. Overwhelmed, a wave of emotions, relief, new worry, confusion, loneliness, flooded through her. She could no longer hold back her tears. She was grateful to be alive, but distraught that Johnny might not be. Even if he was almost certainly going to be changed from the boy she had known before. Guilt bubbled beneath the surface. He had saved her life, but there was no certainty that she had saved his. And now this. With a deep breath, Emma lifted the cup to her lips again, prepared for the same dull warmth as before. Her head shot back at the touch. The water was ice cold. A shiver crept down her arm, realizing Mariah was right. Commanding her hands to make it so, she wrapped them tightly around the metal and watched as the water inside slowly began to steam and then boil, all while Emma felt nothing herself. The cup was practically glowing. She tried the other direction, thinking the opposite, and within a few seconds the contents were solid, and frost lined the fringe of the cup. The effort drained her. Emma felt her vision whiten as she dropped the cup and clutched at the sides of the bed, fearing everything this meant. They had rewritten the records before, but could a second time be done? How messy would that make things? Did this mean her father was wrong? Why had he been so persistent about her throwing if this was always a possibility? These questions rattled around inside her skull, interspersed with the fears about Johnny, then the others. Where was Andrew? Why hadn't they sent him a Riley? The clouds of realization and uncertainty continued to overcast her inside the ambulance, to the point that she stood and wandered outside into the sunlight to try to clear them, even as her head remained light. She was halfway around the world, having just escaped the most wanted fugitive on the planet, alone and scared while her boyfriend was in transit to have his arm amputated after helping her escape. She had survived a fire that would have killed anybody else. no longer the powerless girl she had always expected to be. She had no idea where her family was, nor where Cherwinski was, or even if he was still alive. Her own mortal status seemed uncertain. Emma was not entirely convinced this wasn't some intense dream. The only thing she knew to be fact was that she could control the temperature with the touch of her finger. It was almost too ridiculous to accept. Emma started laughing. The death of a siren to her right pulled her out of her fit, and she found her eyes drawn to another bizarre scene. She had expected to find the cars surrounding the helicopter, a missions leader flashing some kind of presiding authority over the responding locals. The helicopter was instead behind her, untouched. Several police vehicles, including a handful of federal cars, were beginning to disperse from a black sports car. Its underside was still smoking, the result of which she realized was entirely unrelated to the tower fire. Its front was comically flattened around a central indent. Its windshield had splintered into a web of cracks. The doors were open, airbags deployed and long since popped. Its occupants were nowhere to be seen. It had obviously struck something very hard and very fast. The object of its destruction was also missing, or at least what Emma had expected to find in its way. But the car had not collided with a piece of the destroyed tower. Instead, a body bag sat 30 meters from the wreck, already closed over its contents. Several officials stood above it, seemingly arguing about the site. Fuad and Mariah were standing beside other members of their squad, watching the commotion. "What happened?" she asked, her curiosity helping to distract her from the increasingly bizarre reality. Mariah's eyes were wide with disbelief. Fuad raised an eyebrow. "Someone else got him first." Emma matched Mariah, realizing who he meant. "What?" she coughed. "Who?" One of the other men in the squad turned from the end of the line of observers. His face was covered in a checkered keffiyeh, with just his eyes visible. Had it not been for the style of his robes and build, Emma could have confused his outfit with a niqab. "Your brother caught up with us," he said. She hesitated. "What? Where is he?" Mariah turned to scold the speaker. "Mohammed! They issued the green!" The man rolled his eyes. "You're going to learn the details anyway," he said, and Emma nearly jumped out of her skin. This time his voice came not from behind his cover, but within her own ears. "Don't worry, I'm not in your head. I'm just throwing my voice." Emma calmed, realizing this was the voice she had heard up in the tower. "Your brother and his friend jumped the car from Hadiat and drove all the way here to rescue you," he explained, keeping his eyes forward. Emma assumed so the others wouldn't recognize his speaking to her. "We saw it happen right after the building went up. Chervinsky had made it out in time, only for two kids to bowl him over in the driveway." Emma swallowed, dozens of questions clouding her continued disbelief. Trying to keep their conversation hidden from the others, she asked aloud, "What happened to him?" "He's on his way home," Fuad intoned. "We can't tell you any more than that." "Your brother's fine." Mohammed's voice returned as though he were standing right over her shoulder. "The other one's a little shaken, as you might guess. It came across that this was his first. He was the one behind the wheel." A mental image played itself out before Emma as she stared at the wrecked car. "We had no choice but to arrest them," he added. "They hid from our Prime Minister the fact that you had even been captured, then hijacked the vehicle and broke a dozen international travel laws on the way. They're lucky no one else got to them before we did. Regardless, they're about 20 minutes ahead of us. First to Hadiat, and then back to Tylersville for questioning." He cleared up the most pressing of her questions, and even with the new fear for her brother, relief spread through her staring at the body bag. What a joke, she thought, wanting to run over and spit on the corpse. No doubt her father was already plotting the best way to publicize their death and strip his martyrdom of any pomp. "What about me?" she wanted to ask as her last question to Mohammed, but the thought was answered almost immediately as two of the police cars were replaced by a giant white Mercedes, bearing a prominent government seal over its passenger door. It avoided the crash entirely, instead pulling up directly in front of Emma and the remainder of Squad 2045. The front window descended, and a dark man with sunglasses spoke orders to the squad in stoic Arabic. Fuad and Mariah turned to Emma, and before she could stop them, both had a firm grip around each of her arms. "Sorry, Emma," Mariah said authentically. "Your father's orders." She was at the rear door before she even remembered her new ability. Mohammed opened the door, and the other two herded her inside a rear-facing seat. To her horror, the only other passenger in the vehicle's tinted rear was Mike Richmond. Emma closed her mouth immediately, suddenly painfully aware of her lack of sufficient clothing. Anything she did or said could put both herself and her father in more danger than they already were. The vehicle began to drive back toward the city. Mike's eyes were their usual bored, menacing brown. A minute passed between them before he finally broke the silence. "Seatbelt." "Where's Doug?" she squeaked. "Seat belt," he ordered again, in a voice Emma struggled to disobey. Keeping her eyes completely on Richmond, she wrapped the strap over her shoulder, thankful for the slight barrier now between them. "Where's Doug?" she repeated. "They said the foreign minister was coming, not you." Anyone else might have seen Richmond's answer as professional, but behind his stoic face, Emma knew he was reveling in it. "I am the foreign minister." She bit her lip to keep it from opening in abject horror. For years, Richmond had been undermining her father's power from below, always kept at bay by his lack of proper position. If this was true, he finally had the platform to take him down. An entire ministry under his thumb. Resources? Personnel? She thought back to what Chervinsky had said about her father. V. Subrov. Foreign Affairs would know exactly what happened, and no one would hide that from their chief executive. Forget the Granhogs. Forget losing his job. Bill Guerin would be executed. Mike stared at her, begging her to ask the question. "What happened to Doug?" The shape of his tongue rolled over his bottom teeth. "Doug resigned," he said, his tone almost upset about it. "He's currently under investigation for a handful of constitutional offenses. Misappropriation of company funds, authorization of company resources for private gain, and most damningly, treason." Emma's breath slowed to a halt. "Treason?" she repeated, low as a whisper. Mike folded his hands over his lap. "I'm sure you're aware, history buff that you are, that Doug's family comes from Poland." Emma nodded. "Obviously." Ever since Chervinsky began his rise to power, Doug's taken a bit too personal an interest in Polish affairs. With everything that's come out in the investigation, the evidence of him back-channeling his influence is too significant to ignore. "That's ridiculous," she thought. "That's like me trying to start a coup in Cuba." "But his parents were American," she voiced. "How would he even have links in Poland? That'd have to be like a second cousin or something." "We're still trying to figure out the details," Mike explained, a dark look crossing his eyes. "What we do have is overwhelming evidence of contact with external politicians, and private meetings with those who would go on to be wrapped up in his schemes, such as yourself." Emma could no longer contain her expression. A look of bewilderment must have crossed her face. "What?" "I'm not here to accost you for seeing a ministry official, even someone with your background," he stated. "The intricacies of your private meetings are just that. You have the right to keep that information to yourself, no matter how damning it might be to someone in Doug's position. However, when the evidence shows multiple meetings across the board with individuals who go on to become directly involved in high-profile foreign events, it's difficult for internal affairs not to take notice." Emma was still at a loss. "What are you talking about?" "Your meeting with Doug," he continued. "Immediately after which you convinced your squad to investigate foreign interests with links to Poland down in South America." She opened her mouth to argue, but Mike kept on. "Johnny Sparks' meeting with Doug after hours, before he sabotages your mission, resulting in the death of Elysian Granhook and disappearing off the face of the planet after committing treason. Your brother Andrew and Jordan Delarue both caught on camera sneaking in and out of Doug's office by way of his emergency door. Now tell me, why would they— Johnny didn't meet with Doug Symbolic!" she shouted, so loud it silenced the car. "I didn't meet with him either. What are you— "I saw you there," Mike insisted. And suddenly Emma felt herself transported back into the month prior, waiting in the embassy. "That wasn't—" she stuttered. I didn't—" Then she remembered who it was she actually met with that night. "It was Shane!" she screamed, tired of repeating the story. "For the love of God, Johnny met with Shane! I met with Shane! He's behind all of this, I swear!" "Shane Daniels has been cleared multiple times during this investigation," he claimed. "Your obsession with framing him is starting to look desperate. And dare I say it, rehearsed. Did Doug put you up to it? If so, that's another charge to be added to his list." "Are you even listening to yourself talk?" she raised. "You hate Shane Daniels. He's a West Coast atheist who jumped you in the line of succession. Why are you taking his side?" She'd never seen Richmond laugh before. "I'm not taking his side." He flashed his teeth before returning to his professional self. "I'm taking evidence at face value and protecting the reputation of a man who is innocent until proven guilty. Doug may still be that. But the evidence is far from his favor. Why else would he resign? Because you forced him to, she wanted to say with a growl. Mike would never allow for his precious ministry to become so tainted, guilty or not. And Doug was too much of a pushover to ever fight back. How could they ever believe he would have the gall to backstab the company? The idea was ridiculous. As her line went unspoken, a new meaning crept in as she silently considered how in the world Doug Symbolic could become the mastermind behind it all. The answer she knew was that he wasn't. Doug was the company grandfather. Everyone trusted him. He was nothing if not a loyal defender of everything the company worked for. It's Shane, she insisted, knowing that whatever evidence Richmond had, her own was infallible. Whether or not they believed her, she knew Johnny had seen him that night. Shane was the only person who could have called him off the couch like that, in the middle of the night. Johnny would never have lied to her like that, directly to her face. Shane had done the exact same thing to her in Veterans Square, incognito and secretive, and no doubt that was exactly what had happened with the other three. Shane was behind it all. Because, she started, but the look in Richmond's eyes, whether he meant to or not, betrayed precisely what she'd almost said. Because you forced him to. Emma felt her breath catch again in horror as one of his earlier sentences replayed itself with new meaning. We're still trying to figure out the details. I want to talk to my dad, she said nervously, praying that Richmond didn't notice her worry. He swallowed. Your father's waiting for us in Hadia, he explained. Until then, you're under my authority as a rogue citizen of the company. Emma grit her teeth. I'm not saying anything else until I see my dad. She could see the irritation on his face as he unloaded a deep sigh. If you don't want to speak on your connection to Minister Symbolic, that's fine. That's for Schuler and Rantanen to worry about once we're back in Wyoming. He folded his arms. But I would like to know, as is my authority to know, how did you end up with Milo Chervinsky? And how'd you get out alive? Emma was grateful for their arrival at the airport. Mike was playing her somehow, trying to pick apart something that she didn't know was there. If he and Shane had teamed up to take down Doug, did that mean her father was next? Her mind raced to find a way to tell as little of the truth as she could to protect him. If Shane, or Doug, had really been behind Johnny's disappearance, then how much danger would he be in based on how she presented his return? Maybe Mike knew something she didn't, and her answer implicated someone else behind the scenes. How much chaos would that cause? By the time they had both settled into the private jet, and Richmond returned to his question, she had settled on one definitive angle. No matter what he already knew, she would absolve Andrew of any wrongdoing. She played the interview assuming the embassy knew everything of their mission in Guyana. Full access to their camera and microphone feeds, complete records of their findings, and the knowledge that someone had sent them overseas to Dubai. Andrew may have been the only person in that group with the authority, but if Doug was already down, then she was going to let Richmond weave together his involvement. Her story began in Dubai. 2 hours later, shivering from nerves, the plane touched down, and Emma released a sigh of relief, satisfied that she had done the best possible job protecting her family with nothing but the truth. They had awarded her the privacy to change out of her gown, though the Saudi rule of modesty felt uncomfortably close to that which Chervinsky had forced her into. Emma steeled herself into a white hijab and followed Mike and the other escorts to a blacked-out SUV. She could hardly see anything beyond the windows, though even if she could, it would have been nothing to look at. Every building looked exactly the same. After a brief drive, the vehicle pulled into an underground garage, again reminding her of Dubai. It's just Dad, she reminded herself, trusting that the worst had already come. Chervinsky was dead. Mike had pulled nothing out of her he couldn't figure out on his own. Emma took a deep breath and walked with the others down a long, winding hallway, devoid of windows. The caravan halted at an interior door, and one of the Saudi officials knocked twice before entering. Inside, seated in prayer on a black leather chair at the center of the room, was her father. As soon as he saw her, he bolted to his feet. Out, he scowled, and in a show of power she had never seen, everyone else peeled out of the doorway immediately, leaving Emma alone with the Prime Minister before she could even comprehend his single word of command. The door slammed shut behind her. Emma, he gasped as soon as they were gone. A desperate hope in his bright blue eyes. He pulled her cover away and kissed her yellow hair, frantically grabbing her into a tight hug. Oh, Emma, He pushed himself away, staring her up and down. Did he hurt you? He asked. Did he touch you? Did he... I'm fine, she cut him off, the answer far from the truth. Daddy, I'm safe. I'm all right. They both breathed a sigh of relief as he pulled her into another hug. Daddy, what about Andrew? She was quick to question. They said he was arrested. They said he jumped a car with Kent and drove all the way to Dubai to find me. How? Your brother's fine, he breathed. He made a few questionable calls, but it's nothing we can't work our way out of. He scratched his face, turning to the door as he spoke. They're on their way back to the States right now. Emma's words caught in her throat. But, she started, trying to remember what the other squad had said. I thought they were coming back here. Why would they come back here? He asked, returning his eyes to hers. Oh, because we're here, she returned, stunned by the stupidity of his question. Because it's the hub for Dubai. There are logistical things to figure out. You can't just send them on a private jet directly from there to Tylersville. Her father had turned his eyes back to his feet. They were never here, he stated bluntly. Emma felt her eyes narrow, again bewildered by his ignorance. Dad, she started. Dad, what are you talking about? Of course they were here. They came with me. You've never been here either, he clarified. Have you? This is your first time stepping foot in Hadiat. They came with you to Dubai. Emma's confusion only increased. What are you saying? That they came with me, saw me abducted, and then turned to go back home? He nodded, eyes narrowing like hers. That's exactly what I'm saying. I ordered them home as soon as I learned about Andrew setting up a new mission. But that's... Emma's train of thought skittered to the black car smoking in front of the tower. The other squad told me they'd followed me from Hadiat. I saw the car they stole. No, you didn't, he denied. Of course I did, she doubled. Dad, they were at the tower. Kent was the one who killed Chervinsky. No, he didn't, he repeated. Johnny killed Chervinsky. The words froze her face in a spiral of obfuscation. Dad, what the hell are you talking about? The Prime Minister looked at her firmly between the eyes. Milo Chervinsky's dead, he forced. Johnny Sparks killed him. Again, her mouth opened with concern. How could Johnny have killed Chervinsky? She prodded. He was still alive the last we saw him, and Johnny was half dead himself when I pushed him to the helicopter. Emma, you're not making any sense, he declined. I'm not making any sense? She screamed. Dad, what the hell kind of story have you been hearing? Johnny got a spear of rebar through his shoulder after he rescued me from Chervinsky. I shoved him off the building to... Johnny didn't rescue you from Chervinsky, he stated firmly, his eyes piercing into her own. Dad. Emma, sit down, he commanded. Dad, I don't need to... Emma. Sit down, he repeated, though not in the voice she expected. The commanding presence of the Prime Minister had gone, replaced by the concern of a father seeing his child in crisis. Her stomach dropped. Her head began pulsing between heavy and light. The room was spinning. Suddenly, the truth of her reality stopped being truth, and Emma questioned everything she was describing, as though she had just woken up from a bad dream. She felt herself reach for the chair at the center of the room, concerned about the things she'd been stating as fact. Her heart pounding, she climbed up into it and found herself staring nearer to the ceiling than the floor. The chair had reclined. Her confidence came rushing back as soon as she stilled. Of course I'm right, she thought harshly. Dad doesn't know what he's talking about. I was there. Then, someone's been feeding him misinformation. And her conversation with Richmond in Dubai reared itself to the front of her mind. Suddenly aware of the room around them and where she was sitting, Emma noticed a computer in one corner atop a wall-mounted counter. On the far wall, a sink jutted out before a row of cabinets topped with hooked instruments. Are we in a dentist's office? She asked, her confusion returning. Usually, he nodded. I wanted us out of Tarek's eyes and ears. I don't think anyone would listen to us here. Emma's eyes found the door. But, Mike, she stated, keeping her thoughts steady. He could be listening too. No, he rejected. He's working on Kent right now. But, she tried. What do you mean he's working on Kent? I'm here with you. He's talking to Kent. Well, Kent's in America, she yelled, trying to follow her father's logic. So's Mike. I just talked to him! Her father shook his head. No, you didn't. Of course I did! Her father brandished something from his pocket, and a blast of what Emma hoped was water sprayed over her face in a thick mist. Dad, what are you... She sputtered. You never spoke to Mike Richmond, he insisted. The mist hit her again. Of course I did, she choked, momentarily blind as she struggled to wipe the liquid from her eyes. Why are you gaslighting me? Look at me, he snapped. No, she struggled, blinking away the sweet-smelling droplets from her face. Emma, look me in the eyes, he commanded. His face was the only thing she could see when her vision returned. You never met with Mike Richmond. What do you... She breathed. Doug Symbolic, he named, dramatically changing the subject. What did you hear? Dad, answer... Look at me, he shouted again. You never met with Mike Richmond. Why are you defending him? She returned. Dad, Doug is innocent. Whatever Mike said, hell, whatever Shane said too. They're working together to frame him. You could be next. You think I'd ever let that happen? Emma felt herself stiffen like a board. Her father's eyes had changed. Like the subject of the conversation, Bill Guerin had changed his demeanor on a dime. He was no longer frantic, instead staring at her pathetically like she was cornered into a cage. Dad, how low could you possibly think of me? He asked, an edge of menace to his voice. Emma could not breathe. Who do you think that I am? Every nerve in her body screamed at her to look away from those eyes. Look at me, he demanded, calmer than before. Johnny Sparks killed Milo Chervinsky. He said it with such confidence Emma struggled not to believe him. Explain the car, she managed, unable to turn away from his eyes. There was no car, he confirmed. Kent and Andrew were never in Hadiat. Of course there was, she started, but the spray cut off her words. There was never a car, he reiterated. There was never a helicopter. You were never in that tower. You never met Milo Chervinsky. You never stepped foot outside the airport in Dubai. There's evidence, she choked. There has to be. There were thousands of people there. Cameras show exactly what happened, he doubled. You three were turned around immediately by a representative from Hadiat and begrudgingly took a flight straight back to New York. Emma's breathing rushed. What do you mean the three of us? She raised. Dad, where the hell am I supposed to be right now? You're at home in Tylersville, he said plainly. Same as everyone else. You can't just rewrite what happened, she screamed, realizing what was happening. She moved to stand from the chair, but a ring of cuffs whipped around the underside of the armrest and locked her in place. Can't I? He mused. His blue eyes were practically glowing as Emma struggled in place, flailing her legs for leverage but succeeding in nothing beyond chafing her wrists. In desperation, she clutched the chair with her hands and felt the leather scorch beneath her fingers. Explain that! She shouted, smelling the chair burn. How the hell can you explain that? Late form ITI, he shrugged nonchalant. Exactly as it is. He leaned forward maliciously. There was a malfunction with your water heater, he explained. Your shower threatened to scald you, only for your radiation effect to finally kick in. Screw you! She spat. He responded with another blast of mist. Obey thy mother and father, he ordered. What about Johnny? She questioned. How can you explain that one away? His arm isn't going to heal itself, or are you just going to let him die? Her mind was so clouded the idea hardly even registered an emotional reaction. You really think we'd let a tool like him go to waste? He replied. Steam was literally billowing out of her nostrils, a combination of the spray and her effect. The bright smell was assaulting her senses. What do you mean, tool? She questioned, genuinely curious. You're saying you planned this? Of course we planned this, he claimed, almost prideful. Again, who do you think that I am? The black cloud descended again as Emma realized with horror exactly what he was implying. She was wrong. She was so wrong. Her father's face was nearly grinning, watching her figure it out. You screwed Doug, she assessed. Oh my God, you all screwed Doug. All three of you. Bold of you to assume there aren't more involved, he bragged. I thought Tate played his part a little too obviously. Why? She begged. Why would you do that to him? How could you let Richmond in? Friends close, enemies closer, he quoted, letting the words hang before analyzing them. That's horse shit. Everyone who doesn't fear you is an enemy. And if you can't break them, you confuse them. Let them believe they're closer to the center than they really are. Emma's shivering continued to increase. She had always feared her father, but never to this extent. But Mike... Mike knows exactly as much as he needs to know, he stated. So does Tate, Jack Rantanen, Chris Ottman, and every other ministry head that needs some kind of feeding from the pie. She had no idea why she was still trying to defend him. Dad, that still leaves Shane, she hummed. Shane is too smart. That's exactly why he's been in charge of everything, he grinned. He's the only one with the capacity to measure every plan. The missions, the pivots, who's allowed to know what and when. You think I was lying about Johnny when you asked me about him? Shane will use that against you, she scolded. Dad, I saw how vulnerable you were with him in charge. Oh, good. You fell for that too, he mused. Emma, how many times do I have to tell you Shane Daniels is on our side? And not like the others. He's like a nephew to me. Another brother who owes his entire life to me for what I've done for him. You blew up on him in front of the embassy, she erupted. Everyone saw it happen. And everyone was supposed to see it happen, he shrugged. Those within viewed it as an act of discourse they could use to their advantage. The rest had their suspicions stifled. When I tell you to trust me, that means trust me. Emma looked down at her manacled wrists. Trust you, she huffed. How can I trust you? Because you should know all of this was for your benefit, he insisted. You and your brothers. She was in tears now. How could this possibly be for us? He sighed, irritated at her refusal to understand. I've told you this too many times for you to forget, he presented. By the time you're ready for the keys, I will have left behind one of the most successful tenures of office this company has ever seen. You and your brother both played crucial parts in taking down a second Hitler, short of doing the deed yourself, which your boyfriend managed after no less than a 3-month stint as his prisoner of war. He shrugged, impressed with himself. I don't think there's ever been an easier climb to the top, he said. Even Shane ground his way to where he is now, nameless orphan that he is. You know how much people love him. Imagine your success when you return home after all of this. You'll all be heroes. Johnny especially. I don't want that, she screamed. Dad, I don't care about power. For God's sake, She didn't have an answer. I didn't even do anything. You were there, he intoned. That's important enough. I didn't hide you from danger. You found what you needed to find, and you acted exactly the way you needed to act, and you came away unscathed. Unscathed? She huffed. Liz is dead, Dad. Andrew's entire squad is dead. And he's not, her father returned. He'll get over the vices, same as we all do, and he'll be fine. As for Miss Granhook, you're right. His face turned somber for the first time. She wasn't supposed to die. Emma let out a gasp of laughter through her tears. Yeah, obviously. Despite that pivot and the headache that's caused both us and her family, I would say things have otherwise played out smoothly. Kent is my friend too, Dad, she sobbed. I care about him. Well, that makes one person, he scoffed. His mother's a drunken gambling addict and his father hardly knows he exists. He's disposable. He's my friend, she barked. He's disposable, he repeated. And you better understand the truth if he's to stick around and play that role in the future. As tragic as Miss Granhook's death was, it's given us another opportunity to maintain a spare. Tears poured down her cheeks in disbelief. He promised he could get away, she cried. That was part of the deal. He could leave when his mission was over. And Shane isn't changing his mind right now, her father derided. Emma's head was spinning. You said Mike was working on Kent. Another splash to her face. Mike Richmond? Her father laughed. What would he know about this? Emma's eyes shot to the door. Look at me, he ordered, and she was unable to disobey. Mike Richmond is not on our side. Mike Richmond knows nothing about this, and you will never tell him anything you or I discuss in private. But, she started, losing her words in a mess of jumbled thoughts. How are you going to explain away what we found in Guyana? You found evidence of Chervinsky being in Dubai, he assured. Nothing more. Well, what about the clones? She raised, desperate to keep hold of something concrete. We found an active biotech facility, Dad. That's not nothing. There are no clones, he laughed. Then explain the safe house in Beijing. This time he drenched her. Emma, look at me, he demanded. There are no clones. You found an empty warehouse in Guyana with links to Chervinsky. You relayed that information to the embassy and returned home with Jordan and Xander. Dad! Before the company could even take action, Johnny managed to escape his imprisonment in Chervinsky's camp. He lost his arm during the breakout, but he took down Chervinsky and called in for help from Hadiat before the local authorities got out of hand. A week ago, he was public enemy number 1, she critiqued. You can't just... Last week, we were under the assumption that Johnny hijacked the mission for personal gain, her father explained. Right now, he's explaining to Tate Schuler that he was blackmailed by Doug Symbolic, and that he did everything in his power to follow Doug's orders while protecting the company's secrets from leaking any further. Your squad escaped. He was captured by loyalists in Beijing, and your squad was attacked by an extremist third party intent on capturing him too. He's a pluribus. Anyone with any knowledge of the company would want him above anyone else to study the effects. Emma's brain soared back to the safe house, trying to match her memories to the narrative her father was trying to weave. Explain the phone, she grasped, picking at any loose ends she could find to pull the whole thing apart. You had me destroy the phone, Dad. You were terrified. Why? Her father froze. For the first time, Emma saw him thinking, actively thinking, as though this were one answer he had not prepared for. He frowned, taking a deep breath as his eyes turned briefly to the ground. There was no phone, he determined. You never called me from Beijing. Yes, I did, she begged. I told you... You didn't tell me anything, he insisted. Your brain was still shaken up from the mission and the loss of Liz. There were insiders working against us in Beijing. You have no evidence of that. Explain Johnny's dad! The Prime Minister froze again, a look of genuine confusion crossing his face. What? Johnny's dad, she raised. Explain how I... But the thought disappeared. It was like an idea snapped out of existence in an instant, leaving nothing in its place but empty blackness. Emma, what are you talking about? He said, his voice showing confusion which was recognizably unrehearsed. Johnny's dad has been dead for 5 years. He was killed in the trials. She started, agreeing completely. I know. Then why'd you bring up Johnny's dad? He hurried. What are you talking about? Where'd you see him? Emma's mind was blank. What are you talking about? She wondered. Her father swore loudly. Damn it, Emma, bring it back! He snapped, waving his hand between their eye contact. Where did you see Frank Sparks? Emma was confused by his sudden urgency. Why were they talking about Johnny's dad? You brought up Johnny's dad, her father roared. Why? Where'd you see him? Emma turned to the door again, her head shockingly light. Emma! He ordered, putting his hand on her chin to redirect her attention. Where? He dropped her head against the chair, swearing again. Dad, she begged, hardly able to breathe. Why are you doing this? Why are you telling me all of this if I'm not going to remember? He shook his head, dismayed. Once a Catholic, always a Catholic, he said. Confession clears the conscience. Better if that conscience can't be manipulated by the company. He scratched his forehead, clearly concerned about something. Dad, she mumbled, struggling to understand anything around her. Where are we? She looked down at her hands, resting atop the singed arms of an operating chair. No doubt her affected flared in her sleep. She would have to keep a close eye on her blankets. Emma, look at me, he ordered. What day is it? Her eyes fluttered about the room, and she realized they were in some kind of doctor's office. There was a calendar on the counter she had not noticed before. April 28th, she read groggily. My birthday's in 2 weeks. Her face was dripping with sweat. No doubt she had woken up from an intense nightmare. Tell me what you remember, he commanded tranquilly. The last week, from when you left Tylersville for the mission. She started. My head's killing me. Look at me, he ordered again. The pain had not gone, but it was less of a distraction. What do you remember? Emma sighed, trying to piece together the mission in Guyana. We arrived in Georgetown from Solweva Tuesday afternoon, she recalled. Who's we? He asked. Me, Xander, Kent, Jordan, and Andrew, she recounted. Margot was out because of, well, and where'd you go? A warehouse southwest of the capital, she remembered. Middle of nowhere. Abandoned for quite a while. Did you find anything? The words were pouring out of her without so much as a conscious thought. There were files there, she explained. Records about cheap furniture being shipped to Dubai. They were in a few different languages, but only the Polish stood out to us. Did you find anything else? Of course not, she stated. It was abandoned. Then what happened? She sighed, wiping the sweat off her brow. A loose sleeve caught her attention, and she looked down at her outfit. Emma, look at me, he ordered, and her mind drifted back to the mission. We relayed the findings to the embassy and came home. All of you? He asked. She knit her eyebrows, confused by the question. Of course all of us, she confirmed. He nodded appreciatively. And did anything significant happen to you since coming home to Tylersville? She laughed at the question. Dad, I'm just trying to gauge what you remember, he stated. What happened exactly? She shrugged. I've been waiting 15 years for my effect to show up, she said. Didn't expect burning in the shower to do it, but I guess no one ever knows what their ITI will be, do they? He nodded. Glad not to be a skip anymore? He smiled. She grinned. I'd kind of gotten used to the idea of being different. You're different enough for me, he awarded. Gross, she laughed, once again looking around the room. Dad, what happened? Why am I here? He turned to observe their surroundings, too. You suffered a pretty significant panic attack, he jogged. A lot of big news coming out around here this week. Do you remember any of it? Emma failed to stop her face from flushing in front of her father. Johnny's alive, she sighed, relief swelling through her. He's pretty badly hurt, he reminded her. But he's going to push through. After what he did, what he went through, I'd take an arm over my life any day of the week. What about Doug? She remembered, her face darkening. Her father's face fell with her. Monday, he said. Last week he pled guilty to all charges. Didn't even bother denying them. Emma sighed. Doug, she considered. Still, I can't believe it. He raised a concerned eyebrow. Can't you? She shrugged. I mean, I didn't think it went that deep, she admitted, remembering her meeting with Doug about Johnny. I just figured if anyone knew, he would. Do you remember anything about your meeting? He asked. Just that there might be links to Johnny and Guyana, she remembered. Obviously not. Good, he acknowledged. Not that you would need to testify anymore, but I'm glad your memory seems unharmed. Worried I'd become like Johnny? She mused. He winked. Maybe a little. Hold on, she halted. One thing I don't understand. Why would Doug have sent us there if he knew about the links to Poland? If he was selling us out to Chervinsky, why would he give us the clues to find them? Her father raised his eyebrows and turned his palms. Maybe he didn't know, he offered. If he was this far in the trenches? Emma followed. Of course he knew. This never came up in the trial, her father said. I'll let you figure that one out. Emma chewed her lip, sensing his challenge. Chervinsky was out of power at that point, she ruminated. Maybe Doug knew the jig was worthless. Sent us to find him to cover up his involvement. The Prime Minister nodded. Honestly, I was thinking something similar, he agreed. People do stupid things when they're backed into corners. Emma nodded back. Good riddance, I guess. It's a shame, her father said. He was a good man. Until he wasn't. Until he wasn't, he repeated. He reached a hand up to stroke her face. The gesture was oddly comforting. You doing all right? Never better, she grinned, keeping Johnny at the front of her mind. Good, he smiled, his blue eyes glistening. I love you, Emma. I'm glad you're all right. Thanks, Dad. Look at me, he said calmly, and she let her eyes follow his. Sleep. Emma felt her eyelids grow heavy as a mist fell over her, turning the world black. School officially let out that Friday, but only Margot was forced to take her finals. The rest of them finished on Wednesday. None of them had missed as many days as she had during the semester, overdrawing their allotted days off before attendance forced them to supplement their grade average. The sun was bright in the sky when she walked out the western doors, her heart racing as he stood there, light reflecting off his new arm. It had lost its use, they'd informed her. In his escape from captivity, several major nerves had been severed in hand-to-hand combat. Despite this, he had still managed to kill Chervinsky and reach safety before the damage spread. He had ended up in Dubai with the rest of the fascist holdings, like a piece of property. Now he was a hero. He'd been back for 6 weeks, conscious for 2. Even as the daughter of the Prime Minister, Emma had never felt so famous. She was dating Johnny Sparks. The company had not been swept up by an act of valor this way since Shane Daniels returned from Afghanistan. They had discharged him Monday morning, and that week felt the longest of Emma's entire life, waiting to escape Truman High to see him, only to be sent back the next morning. He offered to finish out the semester, but the education board had awarded him merit absence. Sending him back for 3 meaningless days would only have fueled a frenzy. Emma was having trouble fielding all the questions about him herself. Best to give him an early summer and let the excitement die off until August, they had decided. He could test through his freshman credits whenever the time was right. She gave him space to feel at home again, knowing how she would have felt in his shoes coming back from an ordeal like that, suddenly suffering a barrage of questions and private interview requests. Teachers with whom she had never spoken joined her classmates and fellow students in relaying their messages to him, often wondering the details of his escape and how he had done the deed. She gave her father's default response. If they were meant to know, they would find out sooner or later. That typically sent them away the first time. Otherwise, the topic switched to his arm. It was blue now. Actually, it looked silver from most distances, but up close you could see the slight Alice tint to the titanium, giving it an otherworldly look. It was apparently grossly expensive, a new experimental technology which allowed Johnny to sense and feel everything as he normally would with his original limb. At will, it could mask itself to look and feel like his other arm, but Johnny himself mentioned the task drained his own energy, and planned to use the ability only during training and missions going forward. That technology was also supposed to enhance his physical effects. Johnny had developed a second effect during his imprisonment, another cause for strangers' questions, allowing him to move small objects like a Jedi, but he had been unable to get his new arm to work that way, at least for now. The whole thing had been paid for by the company, a combination of Johnny's medical allowance from his father's sacrifice and a gesture of thanks for his actions. She had told him everything that had happened several times, first during the week he was semi-conscious, the rest every night since as a trigger for his memory. He had so far been hesitant to share what had happened during his time away, which she had understood fair enough, but he soon revealed the truth of his silence. He remembered very little in his time between China and Tylersville, as though the whole ordeal had been a bad dream. Jordan had tried the same approach with announcing to Johnny his departure. It was probably easier to confront his brother with the truth when he was still disoriented, enough to avoid hearing a full emotional response, than continuing that story well rehearsed as Johnny reemerged into the normal world. Tuesday he was finally lucid enough to let Jordan have it. He spilled into Emma's room after their talk, stoic as ever, reiterating to her what she had expected him to say. He wasn't mad, just disappointed. And their mom would be too. Nothing had been found of her in the weeks that followed Johnny's return, and the embassy had formally declared her missing but presumed deceased. While a blow to their hope, it was at least more closure for Jordan, who worried he would never get the chance to say goodbye before he was sent away. There was no need to worry anymore. They came for him Saturday night. When the squad woke Sunday morning, his belongings had been packed up and laid in front of Johnny's bedroom. Sure, he could have made a break for it in the night, but they doubted he would have had the time to leave nothing behind without help. All they knew for certain was Jordan was gone for good. Margot broke down again when they all came to the same conclusion, but Emma thought even this show of grief was lighter than it otherwise could have been. For the previous few weeks, the pair acted more distant than they had all year, leading Emma to speculate that somewhere in the timeline, they had quietly broken up. Jordan had also said as many goodbyes as he possibly could. The company dragged out his dismissal so long. By the time he was actually gone, none of them were particularly surprised. Still, the occasion was a sad one, and as she and Johnny made their way to church that morning, the news seemed to spread through the adults in the building, offering their condolences for both his mother and brother, even if many knew the circumstances. Their contemporaries could hardly contain themselves upon seeing him. The conversation that had struck her most of all was Pastor Luke, who had come directly up to the Garens' box at the end of the service to catch them before leaving. He, like everyone else, gave Johnny his sympathies as well as his congratulations, before turning the conversation on the pair of them. Emma had legitimately thought he might use Margot and Jordan as a warning for their own relationship. Instead, he brought up the topic of baptism. It struck her how much had changed since they had last spoken on the matter. If there was any proof she was ready for all that entailed, it was that. This was Emma Guerin, no longer the helpless skip she had been in the fall. A friend had died, Another was gone, and her boyfriend had disappeared only to return the world's most celebrated assassin. With her hand firmly in his, they both agreed to Luke's proposal, and set the event for the coming fall. Outside the company, the Middle Eastern branch had taken serious action in concealing what had actually happened overseas. Public laurels were given to the United Nations, through which a task force had been assigned in partnership with the Emirati government to raid his hideout. Like with the death of bin Laden 4 years earlier, the individual who had completed the task remained nameless, and the blue helmets had become as common a symbol for heroism as SEAL Team 6. Inside, however, remained a different story. People began writing Johnny letters thanking him for what he had done through all he'd been through, with one coming as far as Central Island in New Zealand. Most came from Germany. A few in the embassy were even calling for a parade in his honor, but as much as Emma would have loved to brag about her boyfriend to the world, she knew how little that would mean to him, and how much he was longing to be out of the spotlight now that he was home. Her parents' gift of thanks had been a private house party with only the Guerin family and Shane in attendance. A welcome home cake made by her mother was the only evidence of their gathering being a celebratory one. By 7 o'clock, Emma and Johnny made their way back to the residential center on foot. It was a gorgeous night. The sun was still high in the sky with hardly a breeze in the air. The temperature, no longer an issue, was still perfect. Emma held Johnny's new hand in hers as tightly as she could, pleasantly surprised that the butterflies still exploded in her stomach through the inhuman contact. For once, Tylersville felt like home. And though she was thrilled to be returning to Houston over the summer to unwind from the year, she knew that wherever he was, she would be too. Their early return came on behalf of Johnny's energy level, which was still less than normal since his wake from surgery. He spent nearly 2 hours more sleeping than he had before, supplemented by an additional nap throughout the day if he was able. It was a limit on the time she spent with him, but Emma saw the situation as more of a challenge than a thorn, finding ways to optimize their time without overwhelming her already overwhelmed partner. Tonight was a TV night. They could not decide on any movie that was lighthearted enough to keep the mood cheerful, but not something either would absolutely loathe, so instead they settled down to watch Game 2 of the NBA Finals. The second quarter was already underway when they arrived home, but the game was extremely close, making Emma feel slightly less guilty that she had taken Johnny's attention away from the quarters entirely. The butterflies were exploding louder than ever when the third began. She let him breathe to watch, her lips so chapped she worried they might start bleeding. The Cavs ended the third quarter with a 3-point lead, by which point Johnny had already fallen asleep against her. She had not expected to become so entrenched in the two teams she cared little about, but over an hour later, after the Cavs had pulled off an overtime victory, she looked down at Johnny snoring on his pillow and sighed a smile of relief. Jordan's departure had made her realize just how grateful she was for everything in her life at that moment. Johnny was safe. Her family was safe and free of fear. And to cap it all off, Riley had accepted her offer to come back home. After a summer with Siobhan's family, the pair would both join Squad 3006 for the fall semester. Emma put her hand through Johnny's new one as she said a prayer of thanks. By the end, she was in tears. The common room was empty at that hour. She'd expected to find Kent, but was glad she had the space to herself to do what she felt compelled to do. It was not guilt that drove her, more the acceptance that things had changed. Who she was now did not require the strength the bottles had provided. Especially with Andrew off his own supply, the connection she felt with her other brother through them had disappeared through their experience together in Guyana. If he could do it, so could she. They remained empty since Margot had tossed them out earlier that semester. If anything, that made her decision easier. Saying a silent prayer over them too, Emma tossed them in the garbage and covered them with that day's copy of the Wall Street Journal. When they disappeared from view, she felt as light as a feather. Margot's door opened, somewhat quietly, and Kent emerged with a satisfied smile on his face. He was halfway to the couch before he noticed her. "Oh," he jumped. "Hi." "Hi," she judged. "I figured you'd be nuzzled up in your cave with Johnny." "He's asleep," she defended. "Of course he is." Emma stepped her on the island. "What's that supposed to mean?" Kent shook his head. "Nothing," he said. I don't know why I said that." She grit her teeth. "Well, thank you for your honesty," she spat. "Glad to know being an asshole to Emma is still your default." He held his hands up. "I'm sorry." "So what, have you already moved in on Margot?" She capitalized. "Jordan's not even cold yet." His eyes wandered to her frosted door. "Relax," he calmed. "I was just putting her to sleep. She's probably still crying." Emma stood with her arms folded, unimpressed. He was my best friend, Kent continued. I'm making sure she's all right. He's Johnny's brother, she corrected. Then maybe he should check in on her too, he blasted. Honestly, has he even talked to her since he's been back? Emma kept her mouth shut. That was one thing she knew she could not defend against. He blames her, doesn't he? Kent accused. She bit her lip but could not stop her face from reddening. Kent swore. Unbelievable. He lost his arm, she protected. He's on so many painkillers he can hardly stay awake for more than 4 hours at a time. How do you expect him to deal with this? Well, he seems to be dealing with the fame well enough. You think he wanted this? She raised, her voice becoming feverish. You think he asked to lose his mom? His brother? Spend 3 months held hostage by the world's most wanted man, suffering God knows what while he was there? What else do you want from him, Kent? Kent wiped his tongue over his teeth, sending shivers up Emma's spine. God bless Johnny Sparks, he taunted. The martyr that never was. Emma swore so loudly she worried it might wake Johnny. I wish you had transferred, she added. Yeah, me too, Kent sullied, his gaze twisting around the room. But Margot needs one person on her side. Before she could think of a reply, Kent turned to climb to his perch alone. It took several minutes to calm herself down. When the urge to run up the stairs and finally voice her reply had dissipated, Emma sat down in front of Margot's door and listened through the glass, hearing the quiet sobs leak through. Through all her emotions and thoughts on Margot and Jordan, the sound of her sister's tears broke her heart, and she found herself closing her eyes and searching for peace the third time that night, dissatisfied that the feeling persisted after her final word. Her knuckles hovered an inch from the door for a minute or more before her courage fled, and Emma left Margot to her own solitude to sleep. Johnny was awake when she re-entered his room. Hey, he soured, a concerned look spreading over his face at the sight of her. What happened? Nothing, she lied, wiping her eyes. It's obviously not nothing, he continued, welcoming her to his side. I don't need to talk, she admitted, resting her head on his shoulder. His metal arm reached around to pull her in tighter. It's all right, Emma, he calmed. I'm here. I know you are, she smiled. That's just it. He pulled away from her, just enough to give her space to follow up her words. I can't lose you again, she sighed. You have no idea what that was like. Not knowing whether or not you were alive, what you were going through. Emma, I'm not going anywhere, he promised. I'm home now. I'm right here. I know, it's just... She took a deep breath, shivering. I know we'll have to do it again. The traveling, the missions. I think they'll give me some leeway, he reasoned. I mean, they gave Riley the semester off for what he did in Italy. But they're not going to give you 3 years off, she replied. Even you, after everything you've done. Then I'll do it with you, he said, voicing exactly the thing she needed to hear. The butterflies returned. Promise me. She stared into his eyes, watching the golden rings around his pupils burst in waves through the green. Promise me that wherever you go, I go too. Johnny nodded his head, a peaceful grin working its way upward at the corners of his lips. His arm pulled her in just a bit tighter as he kissed her on the forehead and stared right back. Her heart relaxed its pounding as he opened his mouth. I promise. Epilogue. Opening his eyes, he was no longer the hero. It had been the same dream, night after night. Kent had been joyriding a Ferrari through the desert, a faceless passenger beside urging him on to the city. Then came the tower, a figure emerging through the front doors just as the building erupted in a wall of fire. And at full speed, Kent smashed the hood against the former dictator of Poland. Every time he woke from his dream, it was Johnny. All the accolades, all the sympathies. The dream was constant, almost vivid at points, especially when it came to Chervinsky's death. But Kent had to concede the truth. He could never have gone through what Johnny went through. He had not done the things Johnny had done. He hadn't the name, the connections, or the reputation. Or the girl. All Kent could do was dream of taking his place. The clamor of the plane as they touched down shook him out of his reverie and helped him focus on something else. It was the first time he had flown overseas on his own, only the second time at all without the squad by his side. He thought about who he had been then. The scared kid from Brooklyn with no friends, no knowledge, no idea of what the next 10 months of his life would entail. If there was any good to come out of the trip, it was the realization that at least those 3 things had changed. Margot and Morgan had both asked him to text them when he landed safely, and did so as soon as he spilled out with the other passengers into Heathrow's main terminal. As nervous as he was to be alone, it helped him to be in a place where he knew the language, and not just one he had meticulously studied ahead of the trip. It was easy enough to make his way from the western edge of London to the easternmost point, as Reese had suggested. He was well accustomed to how subways operated, and with time to kill, unsure when or if he would ever step foot in the country again, he spent his day walking through Westminster with a bag over his shoulder, taking pictures for his friends who feigned jealousy back home. Margot had walked him through the company's paid vacation policy, though Kent was happy to find this trip was covered under an entirely different funeral allowance, meaning that not only was this trip paid for too, but he had another full vacation in his back pocket until the end of the summer. It was the paid part he was most excited about. His mother had finally cut off his allowance, no doubt a ploy to get him to finally answer his phone calls, but he would not give in so easily. All that really meant was he could no longer order room service in Taylorsville. So long as he had Margot, he did not think that would be an issue. When he arrived at Epping Station, a cab was waiting out front to take him to Ely. The hour-and-a-half ride was not as rough as he had expected. Once he indicated to the heavily accented driver that he was not privy on the latest football news, the man left him alone, allowing him to enjoy the barren scenery Liz had romanticized so much. It was beginning to rain when they finally reached the island. The great cathedral stood like a grey beacon over the rest of the bland town. He imagined it burning like the tower in his dream, a lighthouse in an otherwise barren wasteland. Apart from their last mission, this was the closest Kent had ever been to the middle of nowhere. The closest hotel to the Grand Hook's house was 10 blocks to the south. Brant had given him permission to come, but Kent was not about to try his luck in staying with the family too. With relatives in town for the funeral, he doubted there would even be space. And since the company was paying for everything, he found a bit of refuge in the little one-bed room at the inn. The first time he had ever stayed anywhere truly on his own in his entire life. 2 hours in, he could no longer stand the solitude, and called Margot to see how things were going back home. She had been invited too, but for her own reasons declined the long journey. As soon as he was set to come home, she was scheduled to be off to Texas with the Garons on one of their summer-long stays in Houston. He had urged her to reconsider, and even refuse her involvement with the Garons, but Margot insisted her hands were tied, and worried the trip overseas might trigger something within herself over Jordan, let Kent travel on his own. Still, she sent her best to the family. Among the things sent home to Ely with her body had been Liz's journal, in which it had been obvious to the family that Kent and Margot were her closest confidants. When they ultimately won the trial at the end of May, Brant and Priya had found it in them to invite the pair to celebrate Liz's short life. Not even Xander had made the cut. Initially, Kent had been hesitant to engage with the family so soon after the trial, fear of his own grief playing as much a part as anything. But Reese had reached out directly, insisting he wanted them to come, knowing how much they had meant to her. It was Reese he was most eager to meet when he made his way to Felton Way. To his surprise, a ghostly shape of a girl opened the door to the chaotic house, and for a moment, Kent had to do a double-take. Her resemblance to Morgan's friend Raina was startling. "Bloody hell," she gasped, staring him up from his toes to his face. "No wonder you were invited." The girl was quick to introduce herself as Mira, and quicker still to drag him through the door and present him to every single person inside the house, including Liz's extended family and the grandparents who would not even look in his direction. He'd been well warned about their prejudice against Americans, and the fact they may try to corner him and blame him for her death. The boy he was looking for was in the kitchen with their parents. Dallin wrapped like an apron around his mother's waist, doing his best to hide from the intruder. The handshake with Liz's father was surprisingly genuine. Her mother gave him a soft hug that quickly turned to tears. When she pulled herself away from the puddle left on Kent's chest, Reese took his arm and led him down the hall to get some space. "Thanks for that," Kent smiled. "Don't mention it," Reese replied in kind. "Didn't expect her to ambush you like that." Reese's room was at the end of the hallway, decorated to bursting with posters and figurines from a dozen different fantasy sources. He offered Kent his desk chair to sit and breathe, before beginning their conversation with the last thing Kent expected to hear. "So," he mused, "is your dad really a billionaire?" An hour flew by before they were interrupted, by which time Kent felt like he had known the boy his entire life. It was hard to believe he was only 13. He spoke as though he had already been through the program and experienced the worst it had to offer, which, in a way, Kent realized he had. The interruption came again from Mira, who was waiting for them, completely stripped of her makeup and dressed in a new set of clothes. Now she was a spitting image of Liz just before he had known her. He felt his breath catch at the sight of her. "Hey, she stuttered, facing Kent but keeping her eyes everywhere else. "I was going to take a walk to the Greg's on Wilson. Some of the girls might be there, but I was wondering if you'd maybe want to come with—" "Mira, leave him alone," Reese interrupted, slamming the door in her face. He turned to Kent. "Sorry about her. You think with everything going on she's settled a bit?" He stayed by Reese's side the rest of the evening, mostly as a protection against the relatives in the house. There were about 20 of them who stayed through dinner. Priya made tikka masala, which he had only ever eaten once at Liz's insistence. That memory, in combination with the awkward small talk between him and her father, forced him to bury his emotions more than he would have expected. At least her grandparents remained firmly on the other half of the room. When the family relaxed afterward for tea, Kent resigned himself to a quiet escape, making his way back toward town and making another call to Margot before turning in for the night. For the first time he could remember, he was actually starting to miss Tylersville. The funeral was just up the road in Chettisham, a village that was hardly bigger than a city block. So many people showed up, friends, family members, neighbors, that they could hardly fit into the hamlet's little church. He had been invited to sit, but as a courtesy and act of discomfort, Kent chose to stand against the back wall. The Granhooks were not a religious family, and while everyone knew the tragedy of their first 2 children, it was obvious the preacher had no idea how to address their loss. So whatever conviction of faith he tried to commune, it fell on deaf ears. Kent was used to blocking out homilies, but this time it was easier given where he was, and by whom he was surrounded. The 2 halves of Liz's family could not have been more physically different. While her mother maintained the same light brown skin as Liz and the twins, the Pakistani side of her family were incredibly dark, as was Reese, who hardly looked like one of their kids. On the other side of the church, split like a wedding, the Granhooks were all pasty white, with dull brown hair the way hers had been. A woman he presumed to be Liz's aunt even had her unmanageable curls. It was through this stark difference in appearance between the 2 sides that he could judge outsiders. A row of girls his own age he assumed to be old-school friends. Middle-aged folks behind them were probably work colleagues from Brant's job as an insurance salesman. The back few rows were anybody else, including those against the wall like himself. It was one of these other backstanders which caught his attention. She had reddish-brown hair pulled plainly into a small braid. Hers was curly, too, with bits popping up every odd direction, eschewing the order in which she tried to keep them. She wore a rather plain black dress with cap sleeves, through which her thin white arms hung by her sides confidently, though scaled with red marks she hastily tried to cover with matching makeup. She was lanky in a way that reminded him of Jordan, though was far shorter than even Margot. Her face held sharp features, wicked lips, high cheekbones, and eyes that were so dark at first Kent thought they were completely black. She would have been gorgeous were her face not covered in a map of zits. Because of this, Kent found it difficult to keep his eyes above her shoulders. The best way Kent could describe her was unfortunately unattractive, and maybe that was why he was so drawn to her as the priest rambled on through his lecture. But strangely, he couldn't shake the odd feeling he had seen her before. His attention was drawn back to the front of the church when the congregation recited a long prayer, most reading it directly from a script in their hands. When it was finished, Reese stepped forward and took the box from the front of the altar and handed it to Topher, who led the procession out into the cemetery. Kent intended to wait until everyone else was through, but Reese gestured for him to follow with the family. In the little churchyard, they gathered around a small hole in the ground carved out before a single, hardly worn gravestone. Aidan Granhook was spelled boldly for all in front to read, the phrase "taken before his time" sitting just below the dates of birth and death. Soon the family would replace the stone with both names, resting together side by side until the end of time. Like his life depended on it, Topher carefully laid the box in the hole before swatting a handful of the neighboring pile of dirt over the top. Reese and Mira followed. Priya pulled Dal into his turn, though he broke down in a fit of discomfort and was carried away by Brant's sister, while Liz's parents wept through tears covering the ashes of their daughter. The rest of their family did the same, with a few of the girls he had noticed earlier adding their own hands to the mix. By the time Kent was pulled forward, there was hardly any dirt left. He stood awkwardly over the hole, the box no longer visible under the handfuls already thrown. He had never shared her final words, but now they were all that played through his head as he struggled for anything else to think or say. Finally, Kent grit his teeth, dropped the dirt, and disappeared behind the others as the crowd broke into an unfamiliar hymn. Standing off to the side, observing the ancient grave, was the girl with the broken face, her stoicism seeming to call him over to her side. She walked to another before he could think to answer, her long legs catching the fabric in such a way Kent could not help but watch how gracefully she moved. Finally he followed, standing 6 feet to her left as she read the stone of a man dead for over 300 years. "Excuse me," he raised. "Do I know you?" She hardly moved. "Doubt it," she said, her accent different from any he had heard in the last 2 days. "I'm not from around here." Kent pushed on. "I'm not either." At this point she turned, clearly recognizing his own. "American," she judged. Again Kent found himself avoiding her face. "Not likely. I've never been west of Galway." His attention perked. "You're Irish," he noticed, the wheels spinning in his head. "What are you doing here?" She turned back to the gravestone. "My boyfriend and I have been traveling," she said. Kent felt his face redden with the surprised disappointment. "His sister. She knew the girl who died. We're spending the summer back in Bray with my folks before we head on to the next place." "Oh," he whispered. "We'll be headed your way, though," she said. "My boyfriend, he's American too. The States are next on our list." He turned back to the crowd. "Good for you," he said half-heartedly. "This is the first time I've ever really traveled by myself." "I'd highly recommend it," she grinned. "Honestly opened my eyes from the way I grew up." "Where have you been so far?" he asked, wondering if anything would be worth using his vacation for. "Oh my, where haven't we been?" she rattled. Started together in Scotland. Then we've been to Italy, Spain, spent a few days in Australia, Morocco, Bangladesh. That was a fun one." She ran out of space on her fingers. "Sweden, Estonia, Kazakhstan." She paused. "We just got back from Saudi Arabia." "It's a heck of a resume," he warded. "It's a start," she admitted. "The goal is all 7 continents." "What does that make? 3 to go?" She laughed. "I'm hoping Argentina after the States," she stated. "Might be able to find a way south from there." "I've been," he bragged. "Not for long, but it was nice for the time I was there." "I thought you said this was your first time traveling," she intoned, raising an eyebrow. "Alone," he clarified. It's a long story." The girl shrugged. "I've got loads of time." "How'd you know the girl? I saw you putting dirt on the grave. Clearly you knew her well." He hesitated, almost unexpectedly losing control of his emotions. "She was my best friend." Seeing the inquisitive look on the girl's face, he continued. "We went to school together. She was an exchange student in the States." The girl put a hand to her forehead, and for a moment Kent thought she was going to pass out. Instead, she removed her hand, shook her head in disbelief, and cocked her head to the side. "Of course I know you," she laughed. "You were in her squad." The reveal of the company caught him by surprise. "You're Kent, right?" He took a cautious step back. "Yes?" "Siobhan O'Reilly," she introduced, reaching out her right hand. "My boyfriend's Riley Guerin." Kent stood there stunned, hardly believing it had taken him that long to recognize her from the pictures Emma had shown him earlier that year. The girl who would be taking Liz's place in the squad once the school year came around in August. "He's here, by the way." She gestured around the side of the church. "We wanted to show our respects given what happened, but the fact that Emma wasn't invited told us we should probably stay on the down low, especially him. Not that it's impolite to attend a funeral." Kent stared from Liz's family to the back of the church. "Come on," Siobhan invited, waving him to follow. "I'm sure he'd be dying to meet you." She walked on, Kent staring as he trailed, worried that someone might notice his absence. In the wake of everything, he doubted they would, and he was glad to have some distraction. Around the back of a large tree, a boy in a fully black suit stood against the stone wall of the church, arguing with someone over the phone. "I told you it's not happening," he was saying, his voice trying not to rise to be heard by the crowd. "Dad's already pissed about it. You can handle Houston on your own. You've done it before." He perked up as Siobhan rounded the corner, then noticed Kent. "I've got to go," he said. "Say hi to Johnny for me." He hung up the phone, then darted his eyes between the pair. Had he never seen him in pictures, Kent never could have imagined this was Emma's second brother. His dark curly hair flowed over his shoulders, ringing his coppery face which shined without blemish, in sharp contrast to his girlfriend's. Most striking of all were his eyes, small and slanted and brown in contrast to Emma's giant blue-gray ones, which were shared with both Andrew and their father. Aside from his height, nothing gave any indication who Riley Guerin was. "Sorry," he apologized to Siobhan. "She's trying to get us to come early." "Even if you let that happen, I wouldn't," she warned. "We're doing her a favor." "I know," he said. "I just miss the Astros." He turned his attention to Kent, registering immediately who he was based on the look in his eyes. His smile was infectious. "Hey," he said. "She said you were going to be here. It's nice to finally meet you." He held out his hand for Kent to take. "I'm Riley.